Let's take a trip back in time to about 2008. Senators Barack Obama and John McCain are battling for the White House. Katy Perry releases her hit single Hot and Cold. The world is introduced to both Wall-E and Heath Ledger's Joker, and Venezuela is a thriving middle-class country. I know, it's really been a decade since this cute little guy tried to teach us about obesity and environmentalism. Clearly, the message has stuck. We're living in a whole new world now. But yes, Venezuela was actually doing very well for itself back in 2008. Its GDP was at an all-time high, unemployment at a decade's low, poverty was lower than it had been in a long time too. Things were looking good. I mean, so long as we ignore the obvious social and political rights deficits, but hey, things were at least looking up. Fast forward to today, and Venezuela is clearly not in the same boat. About 2 years ago, the nation began a precipitous decline that has only worsened since. Violence is on the rise, riots are much more frequent, and there was almost a military coup. A full 10% of its citizens have up and left, and for those who have decided to remain, things have decidedly soured since the decade prior. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was recently sworn in for his second 6-year term after being elected last year. He acknowledges that his nation is in dire economic straits, but as most autocrats are wont to do, he's passing the buck on to others, namely the United States. We here in the US only get the occasional news report about the collapse in stability and living standards in Venezuela, so today we're going to take a look at how bad things have gotten. That may sound easy, but it's actually not. It's actually really difficult to get data that really underscores the severity of the situation. But that isn't because there's a lack of data or that we don't know what to do with it. Economists have a number of standard measures that they use to track the economic situations in many countries. Things like GDP growth, poverty level, inflation, and Venezuela has numbers for most of these figures. The problem is that it's reached the point where they've really stopped making sense. During the worst year of the Great Recession, the United States GDP shrank by nearly 3%. Last year, Venezuela's GDP shrank by 14%. It's estimated that 87% of the country lives below the poverty line. It's so bad that the nation's legal minimum wage is equal to its median wage. And while inflation has always been pretty high over the last couple of decades, it absolutely pales in comparison to how it looks over the last 3 years. It is now estimated to have exceeded 1.3 million%. It's virtually impossible for those numbers to make intuitive sense to the average person. The enormity of that change is just something that our brains aren't capable of processing. This is when the study of society becomes just as much of an art as it is a science. Or perhaps more accurately, when the artistry of the science is on full display. In an attempt to come to universally generalizable conclusions, many academic disciplines try to scrub the context off their observations so that the outcome of phenomenon X in some country can be directly compared to outcomes of similar processes in others. This kind of work is super important as it helps us appreciate broad patterns, but by necessity, it distances us from the kinds of specifics that we're generally more interested in. People aren't often interested in Gini coefficients in and of themselves. They're interested in what these coefficients imply about the state of wealth inequality in that polity, and often what that inequality portends to the lives of everyday citizens. But we use the measure because it helps us reveal broader patterns across space and time, and often because they're more convenient. So when things are just so singularly bad that these abstract metrics no longer work, we can afford to make measures that are a bit more grounded. And that's exactly what Harvard economist Ricardo Haussman and his team did. One of the things that people are interested in when they talk about a nation's economy is the ability of its citizens to buy things that they want. One of the first things that they're going to want to satisfy are basic needs like shelter, water, and food. So Haussman and his team calculated how much food a day's wages are going to earn now compared to 2012. Now that may sound a bit open-ended since obviously some food is cheaper than others. But what Haussman and his team did was compare how many calories worth of food a day's wages could get. That way they could look at the cheapest source of calories that could be purchased. So for 2012 that could be something like pasta or corn flour, although now even those staples are too expensive, which makes the inexpensive yucca plant the cheapest source of calories in the country today. How bad has it gotten? Well, in 2012, a day's labor could purchase 57,000 calories. Now, for comparison's sake, in the US, a 8-hour shift at a minimum wage will earn you about 100,000 calories. Again, Wall-E tried to teach us about how that might have negative repercussions, but that's a different video. But what it does do is kind of help provide a more local point of reference. In 2018, though, that number had plummeted by 98% to where now a Venezuelan working a full day could only purchase 900 calories. That's less than a milkshake. To make the number even more real, Haussman and his team decided to translate this into eggs, which I guess is fitting since an egg is now the most liked picture on Instagram. God, we're 2 weeks in and 2019 has already been a year. In 2012, a day's salary would allow a Venezuelan to purchase hundreds of eggs. if they so chose. In 2018, though, that number shrank to 2. Shoot, technically not even that much. The actual number was 1.7 eggs. There are other measures that get at Venezuela's tribulations that come from other sources. For instance, over 70% of the nation's hospitals no longer have reliable access to running water. Incidences of malaria have skyrocketed over the past few years, and while the rise is not unique to Venezuela, the severity is. And it's compounded by the fact that the nation's doctors are 85% short on necessary medical supplies. I think statistics like these show a few things. First and foremost, it clearly demonstrates just how serious the situation is in the country. It isn't just that people are poor, the majority of the nation is so poor that they can't even afford to feed themselves adequately. Second, it shows that even our best economic metrics have their limits. All metrics involve some degree of abstraction, but sometimes the situations in the social world are so extreme that it effectively breaks the usual measures. Like, they just stop being useful. And these are the circumstances where social scientists need to get creative, and from that creativity is spawned some of the most stark and mind-boggling statistics. With Maduro's re-election, it doesn't really seem like there's going to be much of a change in the kinds of fiscal policies that led the nation into ruin. It'll be interesting to see how the response of the international community evolves as the situation escalates. I'm curious to see what you guys think about the situation in Venezuela, or maybe some other instances that you can think of when normal measures just stop making sense. I'd love to see your guys' thoughts on that, other ideas you have while watching this video, or suggestions for future topics down in the comment section below. Looking forward to reading all of them and answering a few of them in the next office hours. Special thanks to those supporting Professor Politics on Patreon. I'd like to give a special shout out to Research Assistant Sam. Patrons get exclusive and early content and shoutouts, so if you'd like to help out, you can click the link down in the description or at the end of the video. Last week we talked about why the government shuts down, period, and about the first ever US government shutdown. So let's see what you guys had to say about that. Someday Argentina asked if whether or not the ability to cause government shutdowns is considered in the Economist Democracy Index, since the whole idea doesn't seem all that democratic. It's actually not, but they did recently come out with a really interesting article that talks about why, the US has them, but, and why others don't. And it dovetails really nicely with the video, so I thought I'd give it a mention. But I'd argue that it actually is democratic, or, at least one kind of democratic. Right, like, government is so contingent upon the affirmation of the people's representatives that things can't get done unless they specifically deign it. To some, a government that only works at things actively, right, is more appealing than one that's just omnipresent and always there in the background. I think it kind of harkens to, kind of the elitist critiques of democracy dating all the way back to Plato, right, like the idea that democracy is actually more liable to have deadlock than anything else. But the system is definitely not efficient, which is something that Kai Henningsen pointed out by describing how the German system works, and that Ives Clark Langdon points out in alluding to the system in the Philippines. It's not a normal thing that we have here in the US, and it used to not be a normal thing back, not too long ago, but, it's continuing to be a more frequent occurrence as the intensity of politics just continues to ratchet up. That'll do it for this week's video. Thank you guys so much for your comments. I truly enjoy, all the thought and effort that you guys put into them. I really appreciate them, and I just love them. So please, 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 please keep them coming. Sources for everything is always be down in the doobly below, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and the blog. Look forward to seeing you guys out there as well. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you consider giving it a thumbs up. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by commenting down below, by sharing this video, and by subscribing to the channel, stay in the loop for more awesome social science content is uploaded. If you want to be guaranteed to be in the loop when I upload a new video, be sure to click the bell icon as well. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.